So, welcome back to Rallen's Rant. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Dean Karnazes. Dean is an American ultramarathon runner. He's also the author of several books, including Ultramarathon Man, Confessions of an All Night Runner, which details ultra endurance running for the general public. So, Dean, thanks a million for taking time out to have a quick chat. And I suppose starting off, how is everything with you today?
Yeah, I haven't gone for my run today yet, so
So, you're
I'm gonna be a bit grumpy.
okay.
You
Okay.
know,
I'll keep that in mind.
so
So,
it's always better after a run than before a run. Yeah.
yeah, okay. And I suppose, yeah, before maybe delving into your main bodies of work and what you're probably best known for, I always like to get a bit of an understanding of how you became the person you are today. And like you personally, you've experienced some up and downs during your teenage years, like most teenagers at some point, but like is there a specific moment you look back on as like the pivotal moment in your upbringing that I suppose changed your ways or led you to the person you become today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple things. One is I lost my sister in a car accident, and we were real close, like really close. And I kind of turned to drinking to numb the pain after that. and and finally on the night of my 30th birthday I was in a bar in a pub with my friends, my mates, and doing what most guys do on their 30th birthday. We're getting very drunk, and at midnight I told them I'm leaving, and they said, where are you going? Let's have another round of tequila to celebrate your 30th birthday. And I said, no, I'm going to run 30 miles, to celebrate my 30th birthday instead. And they looked at me and they said, but you're not even a runner, you're drunk. And I
Yeah.
said, I am, but I'm still going to do it. And I walked out of the bar, and I'll never forget, I didn't even own running gear at the time, but I had on these like comfortable silk boxer shorts, like these silk underwear. And I took off my pants and just threw them down the alleyway and said, fuck it, head south, so I stumbled off into the darkness. I knew there was a town called Half Moon Bay, 30 miles away. And I said, just run to Half Moon Bay. And, about, 10 miles down the road, I started sobering up, and I thought, what the hell are you doing? I mean, this is a really bad idea, but it's something that just felt right. I love to run, and I realized that it was my life's calling, even though it's such a simple activity. And it's hard to make a living doing it, but I thought, this is who you are. This is what you love to do, so just do it. And that was 3 decades ago, and I've been a professional runner, I guess, an athlete ever since.
Yeah, not exactly the origin stories most people find themselves creating ahead of a career such as yours. But like before, like I only recently did turn 30, and my 30th pretty much consisted of the former part of that night where celebrating with friends and having a few drinks and whatnot. It didn't include running more or less a marathon and a half after a few drinks. But was that just more or less a result of the previous few years, or as you said, maybe the tragedy in the family, or was that very much something that was on your mind? Were you like, I'm Dean, I'd love to actually start running, or do you think it was just a more or less a build up of maybe internal frustration, sad events happening to you personally, or like what you think created that spark to run 30 miles?
Yeah, I think it was one. I felt trapped in my own in my career. Even though I was making good money, I lived in San Francisco. I had a corporate job. I had stock options. All these things that are supposed to make you happy, and I just hated my job. I hated going to work every day. I had so much angst in me about the unfairness of losing my sister, and that night it just something happened, and I kind of just broke. And halfway through the night, when I was feeling my worst, I mean, let's face it, just running that far without having run in the past 15 years, it was, I was chafing, I was blistering. It was kind of miserable. But I looked up and I saw the stars. It was a dark night, and I thought, this is why God put you here. And, instead of being angry about losing your sister, you should honor her like every day. No one knows when their time's going to come. So, why waste it being bitter and drunk and spiteful and numb? Celebrate her life by honoring her by being the best that you can be. And that's it. All kind of came to a head that night, and I'm sure it had something to do with the tequila, something to do with
Yeah.
the endorphins, from running. But it forever changed the course of my life, that night.
Mm. And when you, I suppose, like looking at your childhood and maybe your 20s and 30s, you had a coach, Jack McTavish, if that's the way to pronounce it. He was like your first real coach, and one of the things he told you was that, like, if you felt good during a race, it wasn't being run correctly, and he was saying that, like, it was supposed to hurt like hell. And I suppose from the outside looking in, that's why a lot of people look at ultramarathon running as like a form of suffering, so to speak. But do you think through all your experiences, especially in the ultramarathon runner side of things, like, do you think suffering is inherently valuable, or is it more or less the mindset around suffering that can make it transformative?
I think that so many people try to avoid hardship and pain and suffering, and it's just unavoidable. And I think, what he said is, it's going to hurt like hell. Know that it's going to hurt like hell. I mean, that's what life's all about. If you're alive, it's going to be painful, and to embrace it. Enjoy the suffering, push harder. If you're not suffering, you're not trying hard enough. So I think it was a good lesson in that. I mean, pretty hardcore lesson. I mean, he was an ex-military guy, pretty regimented guy, and that was just his motto: is make it hurt. If running feels good, you're doing it wrong. It's supposed to hurt
Yeah.
like hell. Yeah, yeah.
And would I be right in saying after this maybe short exposure to running that you stopped running for well over a decade?
Yeah, no, I mean, I ran competitively when I was in high school, in my first year of high school, and we won the championships, the league championships, and I thought, that's as far as I'll ever take my running career, and I said enough of running, and I stopped running when I was 15. Yeah.
Wow. And I suppose looking at the body of work that you have, there's like in 2006 the 50 marathons in 50 days in 50 states. There was like you ran a marathon in the South Pole in like minus 13 Fahrenheit and without snowshoes. You've done, some of the hottest climates imaginable on planet Earth. You've done marathons in, but I suppose to focus in on the South Pole, because cold and hot brings different challenges, but like the South Pole being that cold, I suppose firstly, like what made you want to do that? And then secondly, how was that entire experience of running in the South Pole at temperatures of like minus 13 or minus 25, depending on if you're saying Fahrenheit or Celsius? But how was that whole experience?
Well, it was the first time it had ever been done, so it was the first, and I thought I want to be part of this because it's the first time. I thought I was told there'd be like 40 to 50 people that were going to try this marathon at the South Pole, and there ended up being three of us. It was so dangerous down there that it was never meant to be. I mean, I thought I was going to be home in about 10 days, and a month later, I stumbled back home. So we got weathered in at the South Pole. There's delay after delay. It was very dangerous conditions. I mean, it's minus 25 degrees. uh, you can't sleep at night either because the sun never sets, so it's bright daylight the whole day long. You can't tell if it's 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon. Everything that you own in your shave kit, your toothpaste, you can't shave because everything's frozen. I mean, if you want to brush your teeth, you got to heat water on a stove. Put the toothpaste in there, and then put your toothbrush in there, and you've got like 3 minutes before it freezes again. So it was kind of reckless what we did, but we were trapped down there, and we paid so many dues. We put so much into it that I kind of felt like, God damn it, I got to do this. and that's how people get themselves in trouble. But thankfully, we pulled it off. It took me over 9 hours to run a
Yeah.
marathon. I mean, the snow drifts were up to my knees. I remember there were points where I was just trying to use my hands to kind of like crawl just to clear a path to even be able to move forward. Yeah, I got frostbite on my nose. It was just a kind of a shit show, but we pulled it off, and it's never been done again. It was absurd to try to do that. I've run on Antarctica, other races on Antarctica, but it's always been on the exterior of the continent, which is much milder than the South Pole. The South Pole is just it's there's nothing alive there. I remember when I got home, I was shaving and I heard a bird like chirping, and it was so foreign to me to hear the sound of an animal because people think there's penguins at the South Pole, it's teeming with life. Not at the South Pole. There's nothing there. On Antarctica, along the exterior, there are a lot of penguins, but at the South Pole, there's nothing alive there.
Wow. And was there any? I'm just trying to visualize it to the best of my brain's capacity here. Like when you're out running for 8 9 hours in the South Pole, and I'd imagine the terrain is sometimes flat, sometimes, as you said, nearly up to your hips in snow. Was that just like pretty much you just on your own battling the elements, or like was there support following you around as much as possible, or was it very much like you in the freezing cold wilderness for 8 9 hours?
Yeah, I mean, we had a snowmobile, but they never adjusted the carburetor for altitude. The South Pole is at about 10,000 feet above sea level. Even though it's flat, you're at on the top of a mountain essentially. So the snowmobile wasn't very reliable. It would get to you periodically, but it was stalling out a lot. And I remember at one point, the guy who was driving it pulled up next to me, and he just tipped over. He just fell off the he fell off the snowmobile because he got vertigo. I mean, when you're running, all you see is white. You can't tell what's up or down or left or right. All you see is white, like you're in a cloud, and it was very disorienting. So the support that was available along the way was it was sporadic, and and trying to get anything in your mouth was a full-time job because you had to pull off your balaclava. Your head is covered. You've got goggles on so your eyeballs don't freeze. You've got a neoprene muffler in front of your face so you can't breathe in this super chilled air because your lungs and your trachea will freeze. So you got to kind of get this stuff off to try to get food in your mouth. So it was not ideal at all for but we pulled it off, and like I said, it's never been done before or after. Yeah.
Yeah, and rightly so, says most people. But the I suppose 4 years on down the line, you don't necessarily go to below freezing. I suppose elements. You decide on the 50 marathons in 50 days in 50 states in 2006. The reason, like, I have a huge amount of, I suppose, admiration for this feat is recently, only a couple of weeks ago, I did 7 marathons in 7 days for a
Yeah.
good cause. But
Yeah.
50 and 50 is definitely putting anyone else's efforts to shame. But like, why did you feel the need to do that? Because it is a very unique challenge. It's not like, oh, I'm going to try do a sub 3 hour marathon or sub 2.5 marathon. Like, it's very particular. There's a lot of pre planning that needs to go in. And yeah, like, where did that idea spawn from?
Yeah, I went to the Boston Marathon, and I heard one of the speakers, and he said he was part of the 50 state club. And I said, "What is that?" He said, "Well, I've run a marathon in all 50 states." I didn't even know there was a marathon in all of the 50 United States, but there are. And I said, "That's amazing." And I said, "How long did it take you?" And he said, "It took me 18 years to finish all 50 states." And he said, "That's pretty quick. Most people, it takes longer than that." And I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be alive in 18 years.
Mm,
So, I thought, I wonder if you can compress it into 50 days. And, and then I thought the logistics of doing this, because running 50 marathons in 50 days from your house is a little bit different, where you just, you're leaving, you're coming back to the same spot. I was running, and then I'd get into a bus, and we drive sometimes for 6 or 7 hours to get to the next state. So the logistics as well were very challenging. And I love the sort of challenges. And I worked with the company that coordinated the Olympic torch run across the United States, and they put together all the logistical plan. So once we had the plan in place, I just thought, let's see if I can pull it off.
And did you do much? Like, I know obviously you do a lot of running, so it's not as if you just went in with absolutely zero prep. But for something like that, where maybe your recovery is jeopardized with the fact that you're on a bus or you might be rushing to get to another state in time, like, did you have long to really prep and stimulate your body for that?
I had about an 8 month uh, training block leading up to it. So I went into it as best I could as far as training and conditioning, but nothing can prepare you for the sleep deprivation. I mean, I remember, some nights I was getting like 2 or 3 hours of sleep and having to get up and run another marathon. So it just, your whole body is thrown out of equilibrium because you're pushing so hard. But that said, the final marathon of the 50 was the strongest of any of them. I ran the final marathon was the New York City Marathon, and I ran it in 3 hours flat, like 3 hours and 30 seconds, which is pretty respectable. Especially New York is not an easy marathon, but
Mm.
to run it at that time after 49 marathons in 49 days, I think it says a lot about the resilience of the human body. That if we train and we follow a good nutritional plan and condition, that we can really go beyond what we think is possible, and achieve things that we never could have dreamed of achieving if we just put our mind to it and keep pushing.
Yeah, no, I do agree. Like, even in my 7 and 7 days, I think my fourth marathon was my second quickest, even though I felt probably one of the worst I felt as I started that. So it is insane how the body can, I suppose, adapt, but equally, no matter what I found anyways, no matter how good or bad my prep may have been the previous night, like as you mentioned there, like sleep deprivation was one thing I found incredibly top of list, where I struggled to get to sleep. I thought it would be easy, but with, especially say, doing it for 50 days with 50 marathons, with like not having sleep, you'd know better than anyone with the amount of times you've ran long distances. Like, how do you think it impacts your creative or cognitive thought processes during all these runs from your experience?
I think sleep deprivation is a big factor in ultra marathoning, and I think that a lot of people, when they're training for their first 100 miler, they make the mistake of getting in enough training mileage, but they never run all night. And I tell people,
Mm.
if you're going to run 24 hours, you're going to, I mean, 100 miles, you're going to be running all night. So you got to go out. You got to start out on a run at 10 or 11 o'clock at night and finish at 6 in the morning. So you need to get used to sleep deprivation. You need to get used to operating sleep deprived. I can run through one night without a problem, and even 2 nights now I can pretty much get through without a problem. I've run straight through 3 nights, and I found myself sleep running. I mean, I found myself falling asleep while I was running, and and a lot. I'm not the only one who's experienced this, and I think the most interesting thing is when you wake up, you're kind of refreshed, like you have a little bit of a nap while you're running, and you pop back to life, and you feel like you're rejuvenated. So it's a funny it's a funny sensation. But I've read accounts of like soldiers on the battlefield that are trying to escape from an enemy, that have fallen. They have been marching like in a forced march, and woken up realizing they're walking as they're trying to retreat.
Wow. And with the, I don't know if there is a specific moment, but from my experiences doing anything that is pushing my body to its proverbial limits, say during those 50 marathons in the 50 states, was there a specific state or a specific run where you really had to dig deep, or you really had a moment where you're like, I'm done, or I'm finished, or you had an overwhelming thought of like this, I'm not going to be able to do it? Or was it very much a case for 50 days you were bulletproof mentally, and you basically just you went through it, and as you said, you finished with a 3 hour marathon in New York?
No, I mean there were moments where I thought, oh, it's done. Like you're finished. You're not gonna finish this marathon, let alone more in the future. And I remember running in Alaska, and it was colder than it is right now for you. It was almost freezing. And then I think it was the next day running in Arizona, which is a very hot, like a desert
Mm.
scenario, and it was real warm. And at the halfway point, I remember I was kind of like swerving. I was out of it. Like my legs were kind of wobbly. And I thought, I'm not going to finish this marathon. And that was marathon 19. And I remember making it to the finish and crawling into bed that night and thinking, you're not even going to be able to get out of bed tomorrow morning, let alone run 31 more marathons in 31 days. And at that point, I kind of shifted my whole paradigm. I said, don't think about what's left. Just, get out of bed, get over to the sink, splash some water in your face. Okay, get over to the coffee maker, make some coffee, have a cup of coffee, pull on your shorts, one leg at a time, lace up your left shoe, lace up your right shoe, get out the door, get to the start, and just put one foot in front of the other. And from that point forward, I just said, be in the moment, like the here and now. So much of our time is occupied being mentally somewhere else. I mean, even now, as we're interviewing, as you're listening to me, there's a million things going through your head. What's the next question for Dean? God, I'm hungry. What am I gonna have for lunch? Hey, it's cold in the house. Whatever. I got to feed the cat. And I tried to quiet my mind. I said, don't think about anything except your next footstep. Like, be present, be in the here and now. Just take your next footstep to the best of your ability. Okay, take your next footstep. And it takes discipline to do this. It sounds so easy when I'm describing it, but your mind wanders, and you always have to pull your mind back to your next footstep. And I think it's easier when you're running because you can go to your next footstep. Just say, okay, my next footstep, my next footstep. And when extraneous thoughts start to enter your mind, just bring it back to your next footstep. And I used that technique, and I tell you, it got me through some points where I thought I'll never make it, and I just stopped thinking about how much further to the finish, how much further to the next aid station. I stopped reflecting on the past. I was just in the here and now, and I got to the finish line.
Yeah, and it's great that you do say like living in the moment, and trust me, it's easier said than done. But for instance, after my challenge a couple of weeks ago, a big thing, as you said, like when I was at my closest to quitting, which was during the Dublin Marathon, which was my 6th day, that was when my mind was at its weakest because I started thinking, I've got another 28 kilometers to go today, then I have to do 42
Mm.
tomorrow. I'm like, you're never going to be able to do that. You can barely run 100 meters, let alone that distance. But that looking too far forwards affected the now. And then when I flipped the mindset of just, okay, get to the end of this road or get to that traffic light, it helped me just stay in, as you said, the moment. And what has actually, I suppose, my biggest learning from that is I've now dragged that mindset and philosophy into my normal life. So like I work in a sales job where we've targets to hit, we've targets monthly, weekly, even like over a 3 month period. And like recently speaking to my manager, I was like, here, to be honest, I'm not even thinking about what's happening in 3 months. And that kind of annoyed them to a certain extent. They were like, well, you need to plan. But I'm like, I'm actually just staying day by day, few days by few days. I'm not looking too far ahead because, again, that's just going to distract me on doing the best I can right now. So I suppose the question I'd have at the end of that for you is, have you ever experienced or even explored how, that flow state or being in the zone? Have you ever explored how that mindset or state could be harnessed in activities maybe unrelated to running or physical exercise?
Yeah, no, I use it in my everyday life. In any tough situation, I come back to that same idea of just being present, being in the here and now. Don't think about anything, but just doing the best you can at this moment in time. And I think, your strategy is a good one. I think, tell your manager that, there's a saying, plan the race and race the plan. So, you've got your planning, your goals, and then don't think about it. Just do. I tell people say, what do you think about when the going gets tough? And I said, thinking is the problem. I try not to think, don't think, just run. So
Yeah,
that's my strategy, and I do that when I'm writing. A lot of times, when you're writing a book, it's a 9 to 12 month process, if not longer. I mean, you're writing 60, 70,000 word manuscripts, and when you're writing that first page, you're enthusiastic, like, wow, this is gonna be a great book. And then by page 10, you're like, oh God, what am I going to say next?
yeah.
What am I going to say next? So, I do the same thing. I like, don't think about, the 70,000 words you've got to turn in. Think about the next sentence. Just craft the next sentence to the best you can.
And from a mindset point of view, like when I go for runs, or for instance doing the challenge of the 7 marathons in 7 days, that was for Irish cancer research. So that was like a big why as to why I would keep running per se. But when you find yourself running a 100 mile or a 50 mile or something where you're out even overnight, are you at this point now where when you do these long challenging runs, as you said, you stay in the now and you don't try and think? Or when there's that long period where it's just you, there's no headphones, there might not be any distractions, like what fills that void, I suppose, through the good times, but then equally the bad times?
Yeah, I mean, I think so many of the races I do. I mean, I know what it's like to run a big organized marathon like the Dublin Marathon, where there's thousands of people. You're surrounded by people, and there's cheering, and it's a
Yeah,
very different experience. And a couple weeks ago, I did a race called the Immortals Race in Greece. That was, it's like 90 miles. I think it was 145 kilometers, and you're running by yourself a lot, out in these backcountry roads where you're on your own for 3 or 4 hours. You don't see anyone, or very little. And you hear stirring in the bushes. You're kind of out in nature, so it's more easy to get absorbed in the situation when you're like that. I think I certainly can derive energy from a crowd, but at a point, to me, I like being on my own and kind of suffering in silence. Kind of suffering on your own, and really enjoying the experience of you know being a human. Kind of in a situation that few people nowadays actually put themselves in. I mean, when was the last time you've been outdoors for 24 hours? For most people, it's they may never have been outside for 24 hours. And when you run an ultra marathon like that, you watch the sunrise, you watch the sun through the course of the day, you watch the sunset, you watch the moon rise, you watch the moon set and the sunrise the next morning, and you're out in nature the whole time. And there's something just life affirming about that. I mean, it's kind of elemental to where we came from as a species, but we're so far removed from it now with the way we live. I mean, we live in houses, we get in cars, we're sheltered. So, to me, when you're running an ultra marathon, there's just some deeper energy that's at play than like running an organized marathon.
yeah, no, for sure, I agree. And a few of the people who will eventually start listening to this once it's posted, Dean, they are bog standard. Some of them are pretty good. Some of them maybe are close to high level runners, and they are very keen to hear your take. Now, listen, very few of them are going to be doing all night running. They probably won't be in need of, say, Ultramarathon Man, your book, but they do definitely know of you. And when it comes to people asking you the most generic question out there around how to run a good marathon or a great marathon, like what's some of the best advice you give people? Say if they're like, I want to run a 3 hour marathon, like what are the non-negotiables that you'd give them and say, listen, if you do this, you have a good chance. If you don't do this, you haven't you haven't a chance in hell.
Well, I mean, you got to pay your dues. So you got to do your training. But let's face it. I mean, especially with AI now, everyone's following the same training program. So the guy you're racing against is trained as hard as you, and is probably trained in the same way that you
Mm,
train. So what's going to give you the edge? I tell, especially competitive runners, to try to view running as a form of play. I mean, if you watch people at a high level in football or in basketball, the stars, that they're you can see they're loving what they're doing. It's almost like play to them. They're really enjoying their activity. So I tell competitive runners, just run as though you're playing. I mean, really put a smile on your face. Embrace the pain, and that's going to give you that mindset's going to give you an advantage over your competitors. And I think that so many people, especially nowadays with the technology, every run is quantified. Every heartbeat, every the VO2 max. I mean, I could go on and on with all these metrics, but at a point, you just got to love running for nothing else than the sake of running. I mean, once you lose the joy of running just for the sheer act of the joy of running, then the magic kind of goes away and it becomes a job, and that leads to burnout.
yeah, and with your, I suppose the fact that as even before this podcast, you're saying you haven't ran yet, so that's got you a bit anxious and a bit stressed. So I suppose a big thing you could, one of your points of difference anyway, is your longevity. Like most runners I know who are 30, 32 have had wear and tear injuries. Like even me after these marathons recently, like my patella is still not great and it's nagging me. Like how I suppose important do you find the whole like recovery process? Like how, like what type of diet, for instance, are you using? Because a lot of people swear by that, and probably rightly so. Like how do you actually look after your body? Because it's easy to say I'm going to run 100 miles today, but if you keep doing that, you're going to break down eventually. But like looking at you, you've done a very good job at doing a lot of these tough races and continuing to do so without maybe major breakdown or major injury.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, I've never had an injury of any sort. In all the running. So, a couple things I believe in is one is active recovery. So the day after your run, your marathon, your ultra marathon, go out and run the next day. I mean, go out and jog the next day. Not far, not fast, 20, 30 minutes maybe at a slow pace. Just get your heart rate up, get your muscles moving, get your blood flowing. And that's really going to help with recovery. I think this active recovery versus just sitting on the couch all day. The other thing is that the post race diet is so important. The quality of the protein that you take in. I'm a big proponent of omega-3 fatty acids. So, if you can have like a fatty fish, like sardines, sardines are great, or salmon. It has a lot of omega-3 fatty acids, good quality protein, olive oil. So, good quality oils, I think, are so important with recovery and protein. I'm not so big on the pasta idea and the carb idea. I think that if you can't pick it from a tree or dig it from the earth or catch it with your hands, I try not to eat it. You can't there's not a pasta tree, you can go pick something. There's not a bread tree where you can go pick a piece of bread. So I think anything that needs to be refined or processed, that things like with wheat or oats, I try to avoid those. I think that's kind of the wrong direction to go in. But I also say, listen to everyone, follow no one. So, listen to what I'm saying about nutrition and recovery, but listen to other people as well, and then experiment and see what works best for you.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you hear so many different takes on what the best thing to do, or as you said, like people love jumping on the pasta brigade before big runs or big physical endeavors. And another point that was asked around marathons, or even like it can be an ultra marathon or even a competitive race, is a few of my friends and friends of friends have trained their asses off for instance, say a marathon or even an ultra marathon or an Ironman of some sort. And when it gets to the day, and I feel like this in my recent experience, that like sometimes your body just doesn't give a shit about how you slept or how you've mentally prepped. Some days it wakes up and it's ready to play ball, and some days it wakes up and it's going to look you in the face and go, I'm going to be a pain in your ass for the next 42K or however long you're going to be running. But my point is, a lot of my friends have been nearly dismayed by running after this. They've gone, I've prepped so well. I spent 6 months, 10 months. I was tracking really well. My diet was good. I lost X amount of weight. I was fit. I was primed. Yet on the day, it didn't go according to plan. It was a disaster. And you hear these horror stories. A few of them never went back running. A few of them never went and said, I'm never doing a marathon again. I suppose you, as an avid runner and a believer in the positivity running can give people, like, what would you say to people who maybe have been, I suppose, let down or themselves personally affected by a poor race or a poor day out?
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying: if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. So, I mean, we all have good intentions, and sometimes it just doesn't go our way. Uh, use that as a motivator to get up. You pick yourself up and try another one. And I recently did the Athens marathon. It was my slowest marathon ever. I was on a really great pace for the first half marathon, and then I just something just blew up inside of me. I mean, I walked like half of the last half marathon of the Athens marathon. I finished over 5 hours. I mean, it was by far the slowest marathon I've ever run, and I just somehow I got the motivation to run through the finish line. But other than that, the second half marathon was spent mostly walking, mostly just shuffling. And I posted like my splits on my Instagram feed, showing wow, I was crushing it for the first half, and then just I just said, God, I don't know what happened, but it was horrible. And I've never had more responses to that post than any other post I've ever put up on Instagram. People are saying, "Oh my God, it's incredible that you actually have bad races," and people say, "Oh, I know that feeling," or "Oh, that happened to me, and I stopped running after that, but now I'm going to try running." So it happens to everyone, and I think the most important thing is that you have the courage to try again.
Yeah,
Mm.
getting back on the
Yeah.
horse, so to speak. And with regards to your online presence, your fame, you've written books, you've been interviewed, you've been on magazines and whatnot. How, and that's a good example of it, I suppose, where you highlight in your mind and maybe other people's minds your failure, even though like running a marathon should never be seen as a failure, but for your own high standards, you were like, that's the worst marathon I've ever ran and whatnot. But how important do you find, whether it's to do with health, the fitness industry, because every week, whether it's online or reading articles, people want people to still be authentic. They don't want people to sell the Hollywood dream, follow my plan, and you'll be running a 2 hour marathon in the next 3 weeks. How important do you find it now in a very crowded space of running, of fitness, to not so much stay relevant, but stay authentic, where you're going to highlight some of your great stuff, you're going to highlight some of your maybe lesser viewed or lesser respected stuff. Like how do you navigate that landscape of staying authentic and not maybe, as I said, selling the Hollywood dream to your average fitness fanatic?
I just try to be real, and part of that is that the things that I'm saying I'm doing, I'm actually doing them. So, when I'm showing pictures of me working out in the gym, when I get into a gym, I work my ass off. Like I'm not screwing around. Like I get in there and I really do the work. And I think that it shows. If you do the work and you post pictures of you doing the work, people get it. I try to, instead of telling people what to do, I try to lead by example. Just show them what I'm doing. Don't say, "Hey, you should do this." Say, "This is what I do, and I got good results from it." Maybe try it yourself. So, not trying to sell anything, not telling people what to do, but showing them how to do it, and being encouraging. I mean, I think that a lot of messaging is it's as though they're they're threatening you, or they're talking down to you. Where I'm very welcoming to people. When I do sets of 20 pull-ups, I say, a lot of people can't do one pull-up, and that's fine. I mean, most people can't do one pull-up. So I started out that way as well, and now I'm easily doing 20 of them. So just trying to be encouraging and being human about it.
Yeah, the human side is
Yeah.
is often neglected in today's world. And lastly, before I finish with a few quick fire questions, Dean, what I suppose are you doing day to day, week to week now to, keep yourself ticking, but I suppose keep your fans occupied and keen? Like, is there anything on your radar? Are you thinking about maybe making another book? Is there any exciting projects
Yeah, I'm
coming up?
always working on something. Not because I'm trying to stay
Yeah.
relevant, just because I love it. I'm energized. There's certainly more books in the future. I might, I did the 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days in 2006. So I'm thinking about trying to recreate it in 2026. So 20 years later, going back and doing the same thing. And I'm kind of talking to some people about planning that, and there's a couple film companies that are interested in maybe following me along and making a documentary out of it. So we'll see where that goes. I've certainly got a full race calendar in 2025, and I think people like seeing the races I go to because I run in some really exotic places. I run across the Gobi Desert, or in places in Greece that are really scenic, and the Sierra Nevada in California. So I think a lot of people like it's almost like travel porn. Like they like watching me because I'm in
Yeah.
these really great places. I'm kind of blessed in that this it's my job, like to go to these places. So I like sharing that with people, and I'll keep doing that, and keep being myself into the future. And I hope that when I'm 80 years old, I'm still running. I mean, I saw a guy who was 88 finish the Athens Marathon, and he looked like he was 60. So every time I think, oh God, you're over 60 now, you're getting old. I see someone like that, it just inspires me. Like, you can keep doing this for another 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember finishing the Dublin Marathon there a few weeks ago, and I need to get this right. I think so. It was someone's 100 and like 50th, or it could be 120th
Of the
marathon of
year.
the year, and
Yeah.
yeah, of the year, and I think she was 69 or 70. And she just finished behind me, and I was like, wow, as much as I'm feeling sorry for myself,
Yeah.
there's a bit of a kick up the backside and a bit
Yeah.
of inspiration for you. But
Yeah.
it was amazing to see. And yeah, so Dean, how I finish these podcasts is I just fire out a few quick fire questions. They're nothing too difficult. And as I always say, in 8 years of doing this podcast, I've never had to edit out an answer. So that should give you confidence that you should be
There's
able
no
to
math,
answer the
right? There's
first
no
thing that
math
comes to your
involved.
head.
I don't have to.
No math, no. I keep it quite simple. But yeah, so the first question I have here is obviously subjective take, but what are the best running shoes one can
Your
buy?
feet. Yeah, I mean, if you can run on
Fair.
grass, or on sand or soft surface, running barefoot is the best shoe.
Okay. What is your go-to coffee
Coffee,
order?
just black Americano. Schietto is Greek for nothing in it, just a black coffee, but a good coffee. Yeah.
Yeah. What is your favorite film of all time?
Oh wow. Uh, Gladiator's right up there. That was a pretty good one. That pops to mind as something inspirational. Being Greek, 300. I don't know if you've seen that with this about the Spartans. That's a good. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I have. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Oh, they're top tier. I don't know if you've seen Gladiator 2. I don't think it's as good as the first one, but yeah, Gladiator and 300, both the first two, the first ones of each are top films. And what is the best book you've ever read and why?
That's an easy one. The Odyssey and the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. So it's two books, but they're kind of the same story about Odysseus. and it's set, in ancient Greece. If you don't know the story of Homer and the Odyssey and the Iliad, you kind of do, because it's Achilles. It's a story about Achilles. The Trojan horse. All the things of all come from this book, and it was written probably in 700 BC. So it's the probably the most powerful. Second to the Bible, is probably the most powerful uh, bit of literature ever written. It probably wasn't written either. It's probably an oral tradition. It's probably first. It was it's they call it lyric prose. So they would sing it like a poem, and then it got written down. But yeah, the Odyssey and the Iliad, or the Iliad and the Odyssey, because the Iliad's first, is good shit. Yeah.
Okay. So what's next? The Your biggest pet peeve.
Complainers. I don't like people that complain. I'm sorry. Like anyone who complains, I always,
Yeah.
always there's a segue. If you're complaining something, I always say, therefore you suggest. It's great to complain, but then make a suggestion on how to fix it. Don't just complain for the sake of complaining.
Yeah. True. And what is the best concert you've ever
Best
been to?
concert. Mm. There's a guy named Billy Braggs. I think he might even be Irish, or maybe Scottish, or maybe even Australian. But I saw him in a pub. I used to live in Australia when I was a young bloke, and I saw him in a pub playing live, and it was amazing. He's got a really like raspy voice, and it's all instrumental, and it was incredible. And I was 15 years old and drinking beer and yeah, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the purity of the
Yeah, the
the
pub
intimate pub
sessions.
session is
Yeah.
it's unmatched sometimes. And lastly, what is the worst? Hoovering the house, changing the bed sheets, or emptying the dishwasher?
They're both pretty hideous. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
I think the bed sheets, those are tough. Yeah. I do it. Yeah, we all do it. Yeah.
yeah, it's funny. Every single male who's been on this podcast has more or less religiously said bed sheets, while the females who come on here are just like bed sheets are by far the easiest. They're like hoovering's terrible or the dishwasher's terrible. So there's definitely something to be looked into there. But yeah, no, that wraps it up, Dean. I firstly just want to thank you for coming on and having a nice open chat. I wish you nothing but the best. Obviously, it sounds like you're going to be busy from a day to day, week to week, and hopefully year to year point of view. And for anyone who is interested in your work, I'll attach. You've got websites, you've got your Instagram page. So if people want to, in the midst of a Dublin winter, see you running on the beautiful trails of Greece every couple of days, it's definitely worth a follow. So all your socials I'll attach. But I suppose, yeah, before I let you go, is there anything you'd
No,
like
I
to
mean,
say?
you've
Or
been. I like talking with you because obviously we're from different generations, but we connect. I think that sports unites people, running unites people. So even though we're from different backgrounds and different ages, it was a really great conversation. I mean, that's one thing I love about running and runners is, you meet people you normally never would. I'd probably never talk with you if I was in a pub. You'd be with your mates, and I'd be with a different group. But we had a really great conversation. I appreciate you having me on.
no worries, Dean. Well, listen, thanks for the chat.